Good afternoon. We are going to be doing the Daf Yomi for Shabbos Kodesh, and we're recording it on Erev Shabbos Kodesh, the last Shabbos of the year, and so therefore let's make this the best Shabbos of the year. So the Daf Yomi for Shabbos is Chaf Zayin of Kiddushin 27. We're going to start on the bottom of Chaf Vav Amud Beis. The Gemara is discussing the question. We're starting 3 lines from the bottom on 26b. Gemara is discussing the question of whether or not when a person acquires movable properties, we had said in the Mishnah, and a person can acquire movable properties by dint of the fact, by dint of the fact that you're acquiring real estate, you can acquire the movables with it. Normally, you would need to do a meshicha to pull the movables. But in this case, you could acquire it by dint of acquiring the real estate. So I'm going to ask the question, do these movables need to be tziburin? Do they need to be actually placed on the real estate that you're acquiring, or is it not required? So the Gemara says, let's try and bring a proof for this from a Mishnah from Meiser Sheni. Now we're going to learn this Mishnah the way Rashi does, even though Tosfos has 8 major questions against Rashi's approach. But this is a Daf Yomi, and we will do Rashi's approach and consider ourselves satisfied with knowing Rashi's approach. So the Gemara says, Tashma. Let's try and bring a proof from the Mishnah. Ma'isa b'Rebbe Gamliel Uzakanim. There was an incident with Rebbe Gamliel and the elders. Shayubaim Bisfina. They were coming on a boat. Now, of course, whenever we see a boat in the Talmud, it's also a metaphor. We're reminded of the last daf in Makos, that it's a metaphor for the ship of life. Shayu Baim Misfina, they were coming on the boat, and Amalem Rabbi Gamliel was a Canaan. Rabbi Gamliel said to the elders, Isor Shani Asad Lamud. And Rabbi Gamliel realized that he had not given permission to the members of his household to separate a tithe. So, and they needed to take a tithe from his food. In order to be able to eat it, you have to tithe it first. So Rabbi Gamliel says, and of course the Ritva points out, Rabbi Gamliel, this goes back to our sugya of Breira, that he says, Rabbi Gamliel goes back to our sugya, and he says that we do believe that you can do Bray, right? You can figure out a future event, will figure out what you meant in the past. And therefore, Rabbi Gamliel says to the elders, this tithe that I'm going to measure out in the future, Nasun lo Yoshua. I'm going to give this tithe to Joshua. Hold on, I'm getting too many Zooms messages coming in. I have to stop them. So it says this tithe that I'm going to separate is going to Joshua, meaning to say there's Meiser there, and I'm giving it to Yoshua. Now, who is Yoshua? This is a reference, says Rashi, to Rabbi Yoshua ben Hananiah, who was a Levite. And the reason why we know he's a Levite because he was going to help Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgada, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgada said, go back because you are from those who sing. You are from the Meshurim. And so therefore it proves that he was a Levi. And so therefore we see from here that he wanted to give him the tithe. And then he says, how am I going to give this to him? Umekomo muskar. And he gave to Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Yoshua gave him a penny, and he says he's renting out this place. And so we see from here that he's acquiring the place, and as a result of him acquiring this place through a rental, he's going to be able to get the Meiser transferred with him with the acquisition of the land. And so therefore, that's going to be effective. And even though the Meiser wasn't yet separated, nevertheless, he had designated it because the reason is he didn't want to leave anything that was not yet separated, because then people would eat from it. And even if they ate from it, they wouldn't be liable from death because of Tevel. And from the rest, he could always separate Meiser, but this is what he decided to do. That's what Rashi says. And then he says, V'isur acher was a third in the 6th year. He also has to give a tithe for the poor. He says the next type, Shani Asulamu, that I'm going to designate for the poor. Nasalahu Akiva ben Yosef. He said, I'm giving this to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was the gabbai for the gifts to the poor. And he says, I'm giving it to Rabbi Akiva, Kadeshi Yizka Bo Aniyim. So then Rabbi Akiva will designate this for the poor people. Umakomo Muskarlo. And he says, I'm renting this area of the property for Rabbi Akiva. So we see from here, from the fact that he was renting the specific place where it was that the tithe was on, we see from here, Shema Mina, excuse me, that this answers our question, but Inan Siburimba, we need it to be piled up on it. Mar says, no, Shani Hasan, no, that case is different over there. No, the only reason why he did that place was because he didn't want to disturb them, because he didn't want them to quickly rush back and to take out their food from there, as long as he might not have that. Rabbi Gamliel might not have wanted him to there. So he says, okay, you have time to get the food out. I'm renting you the space as well. But technically speaking, he could have rented any place. So it's not a proof either way. Another attempt. Tashmad Amarava Bar Yitzchak Amarav Shnei Shtarosein. Rashi says this means that there's two distinct laws with respect to a contract. Law number one, if a person says, Zahu Bisadu Zeh or Ploni, he says, I want you to acquire this field on behalf of this man, Vikasfu as a star, and he also writes for him a contract. Then under those circumstances, Choser Bishtar. If let's say he says, I don't want to give him a contract, he says basically what he's saying is, I want you to acquire this field for this person, and I want you to write for him a contract. But then he says, you know what? I don't want him to have a receipt about this. I don't want him to have the contract. He's allowed to change his mind. The eno choser besadet, but since he already said acquire the field, he can go back on the contract, but he can't go back on the field. So that's the first thing that he's allowed to do, because since the other person already acquired it, he can't go back on that. But since the contract he can go back on, because it was just a proof, and it wasn't actually a kinyan, and so therefore he has the ability to go back on it. A second law that it says in this brisa, or excuse me, not a brisa. The second law that Rav taught was the following. He says, I'm acquire this field. Acquire this field on the condition that you write for him this contract. And then then until he writes the contract, he could go back on it. Why? Because the acquisition was dependent upon the contract. And he said three laws. There are three laws about contracts. They're trey hadamar, and the first two, like we said, and now he introduces the third law, which is where the proof is going to come from. He says, and the third one is idach im kadam mocher v'kosev ashtar ka'ose sheshaninu. And the third law is that if the one who was selling came along and he wrote for the buyer the contract before they did the acquisition of the field with either kesef or chazaka, like we learned in the Mishnah and Baba Basra, kosvim shtar mocher alpha pisha ein lokechim, meaning to say that the seller wrote this contract even before the purchaser was there, and you're allowed to do that so that the seller could have it available. He's allowed to give it to the purchaser immediately after, so that it will be available to give it to the purchaser immediately when he's ready, right when he does the kinyan. And we don't say that since there's a date on it prior to that, therefore it's called a shtar mukdam and it's disqualified. And so therefore, if he wrote the contract before the kinyan, kiven shehichsik imo bekarka, once the purchaser has acquired the real estate, nikne shtar b'kol makom shehu, he's acquired also this real estate, this contract, this receipt, wherever it is. And so therefore, we see from here, Shema Mina, we see from here that he's acquiring the field, and as a result of acquiring the field, he also by dint is acquiring this shtar, which is a receipt for the field. He's acquiring this as well. Shema Mina, lo ba'inan siburim. We see from here that you don't need that the movable objects will be on the property itself, because the shtar is not on that property, and nevertheless it's acquired. So the Gemara says, no, that's not a proof. Why? Shani Shtara, the case of a contract is different because that specifically doesn't need to be put up on the real estate. The Avsira de Arahu, because the contract, this receipt, is going to be considered basically like a reins to the land, meaning it's part and parcel of the land. So it doesn't need to be on the land, it's part of the land. Or alternatively, Mara says, but you can't say that. Valakatani, Zui Sheshaninu, Nechazim Sheila Machrais, Nignim im Nechazim Sheyesha Machrais, because of Bashar Chazaka. The Gemara says, but we said it specifically when we talked about that, we said that is what the Bryce is referring to when we say that that real estate can be movables can be acquired with real estate with money contract and a proprietary act. We see from here that this is exactly the way movables are acquired. So we don't say that this case of the receipt is different. We see from here you don't need it to be actually piled up on it, and the Gemara concludes that that's the case. Shmamina. So you don't need the real estate to actually be you don't need the movables to be actually on that piece of property itself. So now the Gemara asks another question. Do you need to state agav? When you say this, when you say that we're selling you the property and we're also selling you the movables, do you need to formally declare it? Does the seller need to say to the purchaser explicitly, buy the land, and as a consequence, also get the real estate agav by dint? Or is it not required? So the Gemara says, Tashma, let's try and bring a proof. The Katani call Hani, and out of all these proofs that we tried to bring, Katani agav, and in none of them did he say agav, so therefore we see it's not required. Gemara says, well, according to your logical tamech, kani mikatani doesn't say acquire it either. He needs to say acquire it. He also says agav. He needs to say by dint. And the conclusion is tiburim lo ba'inan. We don't need the movables to be piled up on this property, but agav the kani ba'inan. But we do require agav and kani. We do require, but we do require for you to formally say by dint and also to say acquire. So Gemara says another question. Let's say he wants to give the sada b'mecher. He says, I want to sell you the field, but umetaltum b'matan, and at the same time I want to give to you movables. What will be the law there? Tashma, is that okay? So the Gemara says, what about the fact from the case of Rabbi Gamliel? He says, Isur shani asid lamud, the tithe is going to be a gift to Rabbi Yoshua, naso Yoshua makomo muskarlo, and yet I'm renting the place. So we see from here that you could do it. Shmamina, you could sell the field and also at the same time gift something else associated with it. Well, what about the following case? I'm giving the field to one and the movables to another. What will be the law there? So the Gemara says, Tashma. Didn't we learn in that same Mishnah? Isur shani also amruna asula Akiva ben Yosef. I'm giving Rabbi Akiva. He calls him Akiva yet because he wasn't yet a rabbi at that point. He's the Gabbai Tzedakah. Kadesh Yitzkabo Aniyim. So Rabbi Akiva is collecting on behalf of the poor. But the place of the real estate was being rented to Rabbi Akiva. So we see from here he can rent it to one person and gift it to another. Gemara says, no, my muskar, no, it means that it was muskar or meiser. That place was rented for the meiser. No, it was being rented for the poor. Or by the same, or alternatively, Shani Rabbi Akiva, the Yad Aniyim have. Rabbi Akiva was different because Rabbi Akiva was the hands of the poor. Rabbi Akiva was the Yad Aniyim. Rabbi Akiva was the hand of the poor. And so therefore he was their representative, and so therefore you could rent it to Rabbi Akiva and gift it to the poor because he was acting as their representative. Amar Rava lo shanu el shanasan tmeikuan. So now Rava teaches us another law. That lo shanu, this law that metaltalin movables can be acquired when you do a proprietary act on the real estate. That's only the case when he gives him all of the money for the movables and the real estate. Because under those circumstances, when he takes I'm reading the Rashi, I'm just translating, when he takes a proprietary act on the real estate, it's his intent to acquire all of it with this chazaka. But let's say he didn't give him all the money for the movables, then he's not going to acquire with chazaka on the real estate. He only acquires the amount that corresponds to the amount of money that he gave. So that's what we just said. So, lo kanu. So the Gemara says, Tanya Kavasa de Rava. So the Gemara says we have a brisa that supports Rava. What's the brisa? It says Yafa Koach HaKesef Mikoach HaShtar V'Koach HaShtar Mikoach HaKesef. That the power of money is greater than the power of the contract, and the power of a contract is greater than the power of money. How so? Yafa Koach HaKesef. How is money greater than a contract? Shakesef Podim Bo Ekdeshos U'Maiser Sheni. Kesef you can use to redeem sacred money, i.e. the Ekdeshos, sacred money, basically Hektish, Umaiser Sheni. And you could also use money to redeem a secondary tithe. Because of it's Sartag Kesef. And Hektish, it says, V'nasan HaKesef become well. So you can use money to redeem Hektish. And then you can't use a contract to redeem hektish. We have a koach hashtar, and a shtar is greater than kesef. How so? Shtar motzi bebas Yisrael. That a shtar contract is how you're able to divorce somebody. Money cannot divorce a woman. And both kesef and shtar are greater than chazaka. And chazaka is greater than both of them. How is both of them greater than chazaka? How are chazaka greater than both of them? Sheshneim konim be'evet ivri, masha ein kein bechazaka. That kesef and shtar acquire a Hebrew slave. You acquire a Hebrew slave with money and with a contract, but that's not the case by proprietary act on the evet ivri. Whereas yafako chazaka, how is chazaka greater? Shechazaka machar lo eser sados be'eser madinos, because chazaka, once you've sold, if you want to sell him 10 fields in 10 separate countries, once he's done a proprietary act on one of them, he's acquired all of the fields. We're on the top of 27b. When do we say that once he's done a proprietary act on one of them, he's acquired all of the fields? When he's given him the money for all the fields. But if he does not give him the money for all of the fields, he only acquires corresponding to the money that he paid. And this supports Rava, because Rava says, just like Kinyan Chazaka that is done on the separate fields, it only corresponds to because we say, just like the Bryce is saying, just like a proprietary act on all the fields that he's done only helps corresponding to the money that he's paid. Also, Kinyan Chazaka that's done on the real estate to acquire by dint of it the movables also only acquires according to the corresponding movables, the money that corresponds to the movables that you're acquiring. Excuse me. So the Gemara says that this brisa also supports Shmuel's position. This idea in the brisa that a proprietary act on one field helps you acquire the other fields in a different place. Messiah with Shmuel, this supports the position of Shmuel. The Amar Shmuel, Macharo Eser Sados Be'eser Medinos, Kivin Shehitzlik Ba'achas Men Kanes Kuan. That's exactly Shmuel's statement. So Shmuel says, if you sell him 10 fields in 10 countries, once you acquire one of them, you've acquired all of them. And he doesn't need a separate chazaka on each field. And Shmuel's words are exactly the brisa. Amar Rav Acha Berei de Rav Ika Teda, he says, I'll prove to you. We don't even need a brisa. It's logical. I'll prove to you that if you make a kinyan, an acquisition of one of them, it helps you acquire others. She'ilu masar lo eser behemos ba'afser echad v'amrei kani milo kani. If he gave him 10 animals with one halter, with one bridle, with one rein, he acquired it. And also with respect to the field, acquires all the fields. So Rav Acha says, this is not the same thing. I'm like, me dummy. There, he's holding all the animals together. Here, he's not holding all the fields together. So, of course, they're different. So that's why we need the brisa, and you can't learn it from logic. He says, I'll prove to you that you haven't acquired it. Because if he would give him 10 animals with one bridle and say to him, acquire this one, would he also acquire all the other animals? He's only going to acquire that one. So why would you think he acquires all the fields? In the case of the animals, they're separate animals. But with respect to the fields, sadana da arachati. The whole land is connected. The basis of the land is all one land. All the earth is connected to each other. It's one big globe. And so therefore, it's not like you're only trying to acquire one field. Interesting logic. And you can force the other assets to have to take an oath. So Amar Ula, so basically if you make a claim for movables along with real estate that's in, so you can force an oath on the movables, we can force an oath on the real estate, even though typically speaking, you can't force an oath on real estate. Amar Ula, Minayla Gogol Shvua Minatorah. So Ula says, how do we know that you could force somebody to take an oath? That you can make somebody take an oath, even though on its own there's no oath, but as a result of the chiyuv, you could take another oath. How do we know this? Shanemar va'amra isha amen amen, because it says, so it says about a sota woman that after the Kohen makes her take an oath, the woman says amen amen. Utanan, we learned why she's saying amen twice. Amay omeres amen amen. Amen Allah. Amen on the curse that the Kohen said to her, that Hashem should make her explode if she was adulterous. Amen Allah, amen Allah, amen Allah shvua. And amen that for the curse, and amen for the oath that she says she wasn't adultery. Amen ime ishzeh. Amen that she accepts the words of the Kohen if she sinned with this man. Amen ime ish achar. Amen if she sinned from another man. Amen shalosa titi arusa unasua v'shomer shamam. Amen that I didn't sin while I was a arusa, I was a nesua, betrothed, married, or waiting for yavam, and also kenusa after I was fully married as a yavama. That's the words of the Mishnah. So the Gemara says, how can we bring a Mishnah from this proof to the concept of Gilgul Shvua? Hi arusa hechidami. How we bring such a proof? What is this case of this arusa? If you want to say that he warned her when she was just betrothed to Kamashkile Kishi Arusa, and he gave her to drink the bitter waters when she was betrothed. But didn't we learn Varusa Vishomeris Yavam Lo Shotos? Didn't we learn in the Mishnah in Misach Sota that if she's in Arusa and a Shomeris Yavam, if she's betrothed or waiting for Yibum, she doesn't drink the bitter waters. So, and also in Otos Ksuba, she doesn't get her full Ksuba because she was the one who made the sin, so therefore my time atachas ishecha merachman avleika, she's not married. Ella dekanila kashi arusa, so he must have warned her when she was in arusa. Venistra kashi arusa, and now she was secluded as arusa. V'kamashkila kashi anisua, and then now he's giving her to drink when she's fully married. So therefore, now, if that's the case, mibatko amaya, would the waters check her? Nika ish miavon rachman b'zman ish menuka miavon. Amayim botkin is ishto. Eina ish menuka miavon. Eina amayim botkin is ishto. But if that's the case, if he warned her when she was in arusa, and now he's marrying her when she's in nisua, would the waters check? Because since he already married her and he had relations with her after she had the arusin, he's not free from the sin, and so therefore, why would the bitter waters check her at that point? It only checks her if he had not sinned. So it must be that we're talking about a case is El Ayidei Gilgul, that because he makes her take an oath that she had never sinned when she was fully married, therefore we could be Megalgal, we could roll over the oath that she never sinned during the Erusin as well. And so that's what we're referring to. So the Gemara says, Ashkan Sota di Surah Mamona Minon. Okay, we find that you can do a Gilgul Shvua by Soto, which is a prohibition. But by money, by a monetary matter, how do we know it? So the Gemara says, Tani the Be'er Shmuel, he says we can learn it out, Kal V'chomer, from a Kal V'chomer. Ma Sota, Shelo Nitno Itave Beid Echad. Megalglin, Sota, that you can't make them take an oath, with one witness. You could do a Gilgul Shvua. For sure by money, where you can make them take an oath on the basis of one. For sure, you can make them. So the Gemara says, the Gemara says, okay, we find the case where, all right, let's stop here. God willing, we'll pick this up on Shabbos, and we'll review this on Shabbos. We'll make it even sharper on Shabbos Kodesh. And for now, we'll stop. And God willing, everybody should have an amazing day. Shkoyach, shkoyach.